My spoiled sister spilled a drink on my dress during my birthday, saying it was too fancy and that I didn't need to show off. I'm 34 years old and I've been carrying my family financially for the past 8 years. Let me be clear about what that means. I don't just help out occasionally or cover emergencies. I am the sole reason my sister and her teenage daughter have a roof over their heads, food on their table, and any semblance of the middle-class lifestyle they've grown accustomed to. My name doesn't matter for this story, but my job does. I'm a senior marketing executive at a tech company in Denver, and I've worked my way up from an entry-level coordinator to earning a six-figure salary. Every month without fail, I transfer $2,000 to my sister's account. That's on top of the additional credit card I gave her 3 years ago, which she uses for emergencies, though her definition of emergency includes designer jeans for my niece and weekly nail appointments. My sister hasn't held a steady job in over 5 years. She's always between opportunities, always has an excuse, always has a plan that's going to change everything next month. Meanwhile, I'm the one who paid for my niece's private dance lessons, her expensive athletic gear, and even the used BMW I bought for her 16th birthday last year. I never planned to become the family ATM. It started small when my sister got divorced and needed help with rent for a few months. But somehow, those few months turned into years, and my temporary assistance became their permanent lifestyle. Every time I tried to suggest she look for work more seriously, my mother would intervene, reminding me how lucky I was to have a good job and how family takes care of family. The thing is, I actually love being able to help. There's something satisfying about knowing I can solve problems with a wire transfer or a swipe of my card. When my niece needed money for her school trip to Europe, I was the hero who made it happen. When my sister's car broke down, I had it fixed within hours. I liked being needed, being essential, being the responsible one who had everything figured out. But lately, something's been eating at me. Maybe it's the way my sister complains about the apartment I pay for, saying it's too small and in a boring neighborhood. Or how my niece rolls her eyes when I suggest she get a part-time job, like working is beneath someone who gets everything handed to them. Or perhaps it's my mother's constant reminders that I should be grateful for the opportunity to help my less fortunate family members. Last month, I realized I'd been supporting them for so long that I'd never actually saved money for my own dreams. While I was busy funding their lives, I put off my own plans. The vacation to Italy I've been talking about for 3 years, the down payment for a house, even basic things like updating my own wardrobe or treating myself to a nice dinner without calculating how it would affect my ability to cover their expenses. Don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining about having the means to help. I know not everyone is in my position, but sometimes I wonder what would happen if I just stopped. If I decided that 34 was old enough to start living for myself instead of being everyone else's safety net. I guess I'm about to find out because I'm planning something special for my upcoming birthday. And for once, I'm going to celebrate the person who's been taking care of everyone else all these years. Me. Looking back, I should have seen this coming from childhood. My sister has always been the special one in our family, not because she was particularly talented or accomplished, but because she was the one who needed the most attention, the most help, the most excuses made for her behavior. When we were kids, I was the straight-A student who never caused trouble. I did my homework without being asked, helped with chores, and generally made life easier for our single mother. My sister, on the other hand, was constantly in some kind of crisis. She'd forget assignments, lose textbooks, get into fights with classmates, or come home with stories about how teachers were being unfair to her. My mother's response was always the same. I was lucky to be naturally responsible and academic, while my sister was brave for taking risks and standing up for herself. When I won academic awards, Mom would briefly acknowledge them before launching into concerns about my sister's latest drama. When my sister failed classes, it became a family emergency requiring tutoring, parent-teacher conferences, and endless discussions about her potential. The pattern solidified in high school. I worked part-time jobs to save for college while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. My sister dated older guys, skipped classes, and somehow convinced everyone that her struggles were more important than my successes. I remember the night I found out I'd received a full scholarship to university. I was so excited to tell my family, but when I walked into the kitchen, my mother was consoling my sister, who had just been dumped by her latest boyfriend. "Can't you see your sister is going through something difficult right now?" Mom snapped when I tried to share my news. "Your good fortune can wait." That phrase, "your good fortune," became the soundtrack of my life, as if my achievements were random luck rather than the result of hard work and sacrifice. Meanwhile, my sister's failures were always external circumstances, never consequences of her choices. After high school, I went to college on scholarship while working nights at a campus coffee shop. My sister got pregnant at 19 and moved back home with our mother. Suddenly, I wasn't just the lucky one anymore. I was the one with obligations. Family takes care of family, Mom reminded me constantly. Now there was a baby to think about, a young mother who needed support, a grandmother who was sacrificing her golden years to help raise another generation. Even from my dorm room 300 miles away, I started sending money home. $20 here, $50 there, whatever I could spare from my work-study job. It wasn't much, but it was the beginning of what would become my life's primary role, the provider. When I graduated and got my first real job, the requests increased. My sister needed help with rent. My niece needed clothes, toys, eventually school supplies, and activity fees. My mother's car needed repairs. There was always something, always someone who needed what I could provide. The guilt was carefully crafted and consistently applied. If I hesitated before sending money, I'd get calls about how stressed my mother was, how worried she was about my sister's depression, how hard it was for a single mom to make ends meet. If I suggested my sister look for work, I'd hear about the job market, about childcare costs, about how trauma from her divorce made it hard for her to function. But here's what really solidified my role as the family ATM. Every time I succeeded professionally instead of celebration, I got reminders of responsibility. Got a promotion? Great. Now I could help more. Earned a raise? Perfect timing, because my sister needed a security deposit for a new apartment. Received a bonus? My niece had been asking about dance lessons. My success was never really mine. It was always viewed through the lens of what it could do for everyone else. And somehow, over the years, I internalized this completely. I started measuring my worth not by my own happiness or achievements, but by my ability to solve other people's problems with my paycheck. The scary part is how good I became at it, how natural it felt to be the responsible one, the reliable one, the one everyone could count on. I built my entire identity around being indispensable to people who never seemed to appreciate what I was sacrificing for them. This year, I decided my 34th birthday was going to be different. For once, I was going to celebrate myself the way I'd been celebrating everyone else's milestones for years. No modest dinner at a chain restaurant, no splitting the check, no making sure everyone else was comfortable while I picked the cheapest item on the menu. I spent weeks researching restaurants and finally chose Elevation, an upscale steakhouse downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The kind of place where dinner for 8 people would cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month. But after calculating what I'd spent on my family over the years, I figured I deserved one extravagant night. The reservation alone required a credit card hold of $500. When the hostess explained their policy over the phone, I didn't hesitate. I gave her my card information and felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in years. The simple pleasure of spending money on something I wanted without calculating how it would impact my ability to cover someone else's needs. But the restaurant was just the beginning. I'd been wearing the same basic work clothes for 2 years, always finding excuses to delay updating my wardrobe because my sister needed something or my niece had an unexpected expense. This time, I went shopping with a purpose. The dress I found was everything I'd been denying myself. Silk, perfectly tailored, in a deep emerald color that made my eyes look striking. It cost $650, which was more than I'd spent on my entire wardrobe in the past year. But when I looked at myself in the fitting room mirror, I saw someone I'd forgotten existed. A successful, attractive woman who deserved beautiful things. I sent out invitations 3 weeks in advance, making it clear this was going to be a special occasion. I invited my closest friends from work, my college roommate who still lived in the area, and of course my family. I wanted everyone important to me there, especially the people who had supported my career and celebrated my successes without immediately calculating what those successes could do for them. The excitement I felt planning this dinner was intoxicating. For weeks, I found myself smiling at random moments, thinking about walking into that restaurant in my silk dress, surrounded by people who actually appreciated me. I imagined my mother seeing me confident and radiant, my sister witnessing the life I'd built for myself, my niece understanding that success came from hard work and determination. I even allowed myself to fantasize about the toasts. Maybe my mother would acknowledge all the sacrifices I'd made for the family. Maybe my sister would thank me publicly for my years of support. Maybe, for once, I'd be the center of positive attention instead of just the person everyone turned to when they needed something. I upgraded my hair and makeup appointments to the most expensive salon in the city. I bought new jewelry, delicate gold pieces that looked expensive without being flashy. I even splurged on a car service so I could arrive at the restaurant without worrying about parking or having even one detail go wrong. 3 days before the dinner, I called my family to confirm they were coming and to let them know the dress code was business formal. I wanted everyone to look their best for the photos, wanted this night to be something we'd all remember fondly. Business formal? My sister laughed over the phone. It's just dinner, not a corporate meeting. It's a nice restaurant, I explained. I want us all to look appropriate for the setting. Whatever makes you happy, she said. But I could hear the eye roll in her voice. My mother was more supportive, at least initially. That's wonderful, honey. You deserve to celebrate. Though I hope the restaurant isn't too fancy. You know how uncomfortable your sister gets in those kinds of places. Even their lukewarm responses couldn't dampen my excitement. This was my night, my celebration, my chance to finally be the guest of honor instead of the person picking up the check. I'd spent so many years making other people's special occasions possible. My sister's birthday dinners, my niece's graduation parties, even my mother's retirement celebration that I'd organized and paid for entirely. Now it was my turn, and I was going to do it right. The first red flag came 2 days before the dinner. My mother called while I was getting a manicure, something I'd treated myself to in preparation for the celebration. Honey, I've been thinking about Saturday night, she began, using that careful tone she always employed when she was about to say something I wouldn't like. Don't you think elevation might be a bit much? Your sister looked it up online and the prices are quite steep. I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my voice light. It's my birthday, Mom. I wanted to go somewhere special. Of course, dear, but you know how your sister feels about those kinds of places. She gets anxious when she feels out of place. Maybe we could suggest somewhere more accessible? Accessible. That was code for cheap. After 8 years of funding my sister's lifestyle, after countless dinners where I quietly picked up the check while she ordered appetizers and desserts without glancing at prices, she was worried about a restaurant being too expensive. I already made the reservation and put down a deposit, I said firmly. Everything's set. Well, if you insist, Mom sighed. But maybe you could help your sister with something appropriate to wear. You know she doesn't have the wardrobe for these kinds of places. The second red flag came the next morning when my niece texted me directly. Do I really have to come to this fancy dinner thing? My friends are having a party Saturday, and it's going to be way more fun than sitting around pretending to care about your birthday. I stared at the message for a full minute before responding. It would mean a lot to me if you were there. It's just one night. Her reply came immediately. Fine, but I'm not dressing up like some corporate robot just because you picked a pretentious restaurant. That afternoon, my sister called with her own list of concerns. I don't understand why you need to make such a big production out of your birthday, she said without preamble. It's just another year older. And honestly, booking a place like Elevation feels like you're trying to show off. Show off to whom? I asked, genuinely confused. To all of us, obviously. Like you're rubbing our faces in how much money you make while the rest of us are struggling to get by. This hit me like a physical blow. For 8 years, I'd been the one ensuring they weren't struggling. Every month, $2,000 of my salary went directly to my sister's account. The credit card I gave her had a balance of over $15,000 that I'd been paying off in installments. The BMW sitting in her driveway was registered in my name because her credit wasn't good enough to finance it. I'm not trying to show off, I said quietly. I just wanted to celebrate my birthday somewhere nice. Well, it would be nice if you considered other people's feelings for once instead of just thinking about yourself. The irony was so thick I couldn't breathe. After years of thinking about everyone but myself, of putting their needs before my own wants, of measuring every purchase against how it might affect my ability to support them, I was being accused of selfishness for planning one nice dinner. But the biggest red flag came Friday evening when my sister showed up at my apartment unannounced. She walked in carrying a garment bag and wearing an expression I'd learned to recognize over the years, the look she got when she was about to ask for something big. I need to borrow some jewelry for tomorrow night, she announced, heading straight for my bedroom. Since you're making us go to this fancy place, I figured you'd want me to look the part. I followed her, watching as she made herself at home going through my jewelry box. These weren't just accessories to me. They were symbols of my independence, pieces I'd carefully chosen and saved for. But she handled them like they were community property, holding up my pearl earrings to the light and nodding approvingly. These will work perfectly with the dress I bought, she said, pocketing them without asking. What dress? I asked, though part of me already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. Well, since you insisted on business formal, I had to get something appropriate. I found a beautiful cocktail dress at Nordstrom. It was on sale, but still pretty expensive. I put it on the card you gave me, the card I gave her for emergencies. The one that was supposed to be for unexpected medical bills or car repairs, not for shopping sprees to attend the birthday dinner I was already paying for. How much? I asked. though I was afraid to hear the answer. Only $350, she said breezily. A steal, really, for something that nice. Plus, I needed shoes and a clutch to match. But don't worry, I kept it under $500 total. As I watched my sister treat my home like her personal boutique and my credit card like her unlimited shopping account, all while complaining about the restaurant I'd chosen for my own birthday celebration, I felt something shift inside me. A small, quiet voice that I'd been ignoring for years suddenly became impossible to silence. This wasn't normal. This wasn't how family was supposed to treat each other. And tomorrow night, I had a feeling I was about to find out just how deep their lack of appreciation really went. Saturday night arrived, and I felt like a completely different person getting ready. The silk dress fit perfectly. The jewelry caught the light beautifully. And for the first time in years, I looked in the mirror and saw someone worthy of celebration. The car service arrived exactly on time, and I felt genuinely excited as we pulled up to elevation. My friends were already there when I arrived, my colleagues from work, my college roommate, and a few others who had been genuinely supportive of my success over the years. They looked elegant and happy, already laughing and enjoying champagne at the bar while we waited for our table. My family arrived 20 minutes late. My mother looked uncomfortable in an old dress that didn't quite fit right. My sister wore the outfit she'd charged to my credit card while making a show of how awkward she felt. And my niece looked like she was attending a funeral in her attitude, if not her attire. "This place is really something," my sister said loudly as we were seated, making sure everyone at nearby tables could hear her discomfort. "I bet they charge $15 for a glass of water here." My friends exchanged glances, clearly picking up on the tension, but they rallied beautifully. My colleague Jake started telling funny stories about our latest marketing campaign. My roommate brought up memories from college, and slowly the evening began to feel like the celebration I'd envisioned. We were halfway through dinner when it happened. I was laughing at something my friend Lisa had said, genuinely enjoying myself for the first time in months, when my niece suddenly stood up. She had been sullen and silent most of the evening, picking at her expensive meal and scrolling through her phone whenever she thought no one was looking. "I need to use the bathroom," she announced. But instead of heading toward the restrooms, she picked up her full glass of red wine, a glass I was paying for, at a dinner I was hosting, in her honor as my family member. What happened next felt like it occurred in slow motion and at lightning speed simultaneously. She walked around the table to where I was sitting, looked me directly in the eye, and deliberately poured the entire glass of wine down the front of my silk dress. The restaurant went quiet. Not just our table. Nearby diners stopped their conversations and turned to stare. The deep red wine soaked through the emerald silk immediately, spreading across the expensive fabric like blood. "There," my niece said, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Now you look as cheap as you really are. Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to show off how much better you think you are than the rest of us." I sat there in complete shock, wine dripping from my dress onto the white leather chair, staining everything it touched. My friends looked horrified. Other diners were openly staring. The waiter approached cautiously, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. But what happened next was somehow worse than the wine itself. My mother, instead of defending me or demanding that my niece apologize, immediately rushed to comfort her granddaughter. "Oh, sweetie, I know you're upset," she said, wrapping her arms around my niece. "These kinds of places can be overwhelming. It's okay. We understand you didn't mean it." My sister nodded in agreement. "This is exactly why I said this restaurant was a bad idea," she announced to the table. "It's too pretentious, too much pressure. You should have listened when we tried to tell you this wasn't appropriate for our family." I finally found my voice. "She did that on purpose," I said, standing up despite the wine still dripping from my dress. "She looked me in the eye and poured wine all over my birthday dress on purpose." "Don't be dramatic," my sister snapped. "It was obviously an accident. You're being paranoid." But everyone at the table had seen what I saw. My friends were looking at my family like they'd never encountered people so cruel. My colleague Jake actually stood up as if he was preparing to defend me physically if necessary. "I think we should call it a night," my mother said, gathering her purse. "This has been stressful for everyone." They left. All three of them walked out of the restaurant, leaving me standing there in my ruined dress, surrounded by my friends and a dining room full of strangers who had just witnessed my complete humiliation. I had never felt so small, so foolish, or so utterly alone. The dress was destroyed. $650 of beautiful silk, ruined in an act of deliberate cruelty by someone I'd been supporting financially for years. But the dress was the least of it. What hurt was the realization that my own family had orchestrated this humiliation, and worse, They felt justified in doing it. My friends stayed with me at the restaurant for another hour, helping me clean up as much as possible and making sure I was okay before they left. Jake even offered to drive me home, but I insisted on taking my original car service back to my apartment. I needed the time alone to process what had just happened. I spent that night sitting on my couch in the ruined dress, staring at the wine stains and trying to understand how my own family could have humiliated me so deliberately and publicly. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. This wasn't some teenage outburst or momentary lapse in judgment. My niece had planned this, and my mother and sister had not only failed to stop her, but had actively defended her actions. Around midnight, unable to sleep, I made the mistake of checking social media. What I found there changed everything. My niece had posted a video of the entire incident. She had been recording with her phone during dinner, something I hadn't even noticed in the moment, and had captured the wine throwing in perfect, humiliating detail. But worse than that were the captions and comments she had added. "When your pretentious aunt thinks she's better than everyone and needs to be brought back down to earth," read the caption on Instagram. The video showed me sitting there in shock as the wine soaked through my dress, and she had added laughing emojis and tagged it with "Nakashanar reality, check Dobert family drama Akish karma." On TikTok, she had posted the same video with the caption, "POV, your aunt tries to flex with a fancy dinner, but you remind her who she really is." The video had already gotten hundreds of views and dozens of comments, most of them laughing at my expense. But what really destroyed me was seeing that my sister had not only liked both posts, but had commented on them. On Instagram, she had written, "Some people need to learn that money doesn't buy class." On TikTok, "This is what happens when you forget where you came from." I screenshotted everything with shaking hands, hardly able to believe what I was seeing. My own sister was publicly celebrating my humiliation. She was encouraging her daughter's cruelty and joining in the mockery of the person who had been financially supporting both of them for years. I spent the rest of the night scrolling through the comments, each one feeling like another slap in the face. Strangers were calling me names, making assumptions about my character, laughing at the moment that had shattered my heart. And all of this had been orchestrated and encouraged by my own family members. But as the sun came up Sunday morning, something else began to emerge from the devastation: clarity. For the first time in years, I could see the situation for what it really was. This wasn't about one ruined dinner or one destroyed dress. This was the culmination of years of being taken advantage of, disrespected, and treated like an ATM machine rather than a human being with feelings. I had been enabling this treatment by continuing to provide financial support no matter how poorly they treated me. I had taught them that my money came with no conditions, no consequences, and no expectation of basic respect. I had allowed myself to become so desperate for their approval that I had accepted scraps of acknowledgement in exchange for thousands of dollars and years of sacrifice. Sitting there in my living room, still wearing the stained silk dress, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. I wasn't going to be the family member they could humiliate publicly and then expect to come running with my credit card when they needed something next week. The wine stains on my dress had shown me something important. I could see exactly what they thought of me. Now it was time to show them what I thought of the arrangement we'd had for the past 8 years. I opened my laptop and began to work. By Monday morning, I would be a very different person than the one who had walked into that restaurant with such hope and excitement. The woman who had tolerated their disrespect because she was afraid of being alone was about to discover she had been alone this entire time. The difference was that now, she was ready to do something about it. I spent Sunday gathering evidence, not because I planned to take legal action, but because I needed to see the full scope of what I'd been doing for 8 years. I pulled bank statements, credit card bills, receipts, and transfer records. I made spreadsheets, calculated totals, and documented every single dollar I'd spent on my family since I started supporting them. The numbers were staggering. In 8 years, I had transferred $192,000 in direct monthly payments to my sister. The credit card I'd given her had accumulated $47,000 in charges, everything from groceries to clothes to entertainment to random purchases I couldn't even identify. The BMW I'd bought for my niece had cost $28,000. Add in the emergencies, the unexpected expenses, the gifts, and the countless smaller amounts, and I had spent just over $280,000 supporting people who had just publicly humiliated me for sport. $280,000. That was more than most people make in 5 years. That was a house. That was retirement savings. That was every financial dream I'd deferred while making their lives comfortable. By Monday morning, I was ready to act. I called my bank first and canceled the additional credit card I'd given my sister. The customer service representative was helpful and efficient. Within 10 minutes, the card was deactivated and she could no longer make charges on my account. Next, I logged into my online banking and canceled the automatic monthly transfer. $2,000 that had been leaving my account like clockwork for 8 years would now stay exactly where it belonged, with me. The car was more complicated, but not impossible. Since it was registered in my name and I'd been making the insurance payments, I had every legal right to reclaim it. I contacted a repossession service, explaining that I needed to retrieve my vehicle from someone who no longer had permission to use it. They were surprisingly understanding and professional about the situation. Then I did something I'd never done before. I started planning for myself. I opened a separate savings account and scheduled an automatic transfer of the same $2,000 I'd been sending to my sister. Instead of funding her lifestyle, I would finally start building my own future. I researched the Italy trip I'd been talking about for years and actually made a reservation. First-class flights, a luxury hotel in Tuscany, private tours of vineyards, all the things I'd always said I'd do someday when I could afford it. The truth was, I'd been able to afford it for years. I just hadn't been able to afford it and my family's lifestyle simultaneously. But the most important call I made was to my mother. I needed to schedule a family meeting where I would explain the changes, present the documentation, and make my new boundaries absolutely clear. This wasn't going to be a conversation where they could manipulate me or make me feel guilty. This was going to be a presentation of facts and a statement of my decisions. A family meeting? Mom sounded confused. What's this about, honey? I have some things I need to discuss with everyone, I said calmly. Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock. My apartment. This isn't about that silly incident at the restaurant, is it? You know your niece didn't mean any harm. Silly incident. That's what she was calling deliberate public humiliation followed by social media mockery. We'll discuss everything on Saturday, I said firmly. I spent the week preparing like I was getting ready for the most important business presentation of my life. I printed out financial records, organized them in binders, and created a simple but comprehensive overview of exactly what I'd been providing and why that was changing. I practiced what I would say, how I would handle their inevitable protests, and how I would maintain my composure when they tried to manipulate me. By Friday night, I felt more powerful than I had in years. I wasn't the desperate woman who had sat in that restaurant hoping for scraps of appreciation from people who saw her as nothing more than a source of income. I was someone who had finally realized her worth, and I was about to make sure everyone else understood it too. The first sign that my changes were having an impact came Tuesday morning at 6:47 a.m. My phone rang, waking me up, and my sister's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer. I had never received a call from her that early, and I suspected I knew what this was about. "What the hell did you do?" she screamed before I could even say hello. "My card was declined at the grocery store yesterday, and now it's not working anywhere. Did you cancel it?" "Good morning to you too," I said calmly, sitting up in bed. "Yes, I canceled the credit card. We'll discuss this and other changes at the family meeting on Saturday." "Family meeting? What family meeting? And why would you cancel my card without telling me?" "It was never your card," I corrected her. "It was my card that I allowed you to use, and now I've chosen not to allow that anymore." The silence on the other end lasted for almost 10 seconds. When she spoke again, her voice was different, higher, more panicked. "You can't just cut me off like this. I have bills to pay, groceries to buy. What am I supposed to do?" "The same thing every other adult does," I said. "Pay your own bills with your own money." She hung up on me. Within an hour, I had 6 more missed calls from her and 3 from my mother. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I went to work feeling lighter than I had in years. Wednesday brought text messages, lots of them. My sister sent increasingly frantic messages throughout the day, starting with anger and progressing to desperation. "This is ridiculous and you know it. I can't believe you're being this petty over a stupid dinner. Mom is worried sick about what's gotten into you." By Thursday, the tone changed completely. "Please call me back. I really need to talk to you. I'm sorry if we hurt your feelings at dinner. Can we please just talk about this like adults?" My mother's approach was more subtle but equally predictable. She called my office directly, reaching my assistant and asking for an urgent callback about a family emergency. When I finally called her back, her voice was carefully modulated, the tone she used when she was trying to manage a situation. "Honey, your sister is very upset about this credit card situation. She's telling me you've cut off her access to money entirely. Surely there's been some misunderstanding?" "There's no misunderstanding," I said. "I've decided to stop providing financial support. We'll discuss the details on Saturday." "But she has expenses," responsibilities. You can't just leave her hanging like this. I've been supporting her for 8 years, Mom. She's had plenty of time to figure out how to support herself. That's very harsh, dear. I raised you to be more compassionate than this. The guilt trip was expertly applied, but it didn't work the way it used to. Instead of feeling bad about my decision, I felt angry about the manipulation. You raised me to take care of myself and work hard for what I wanted. Maybe it's time my sister learned those same lessons. Friday morning brought the most interesting development yet. My niece called me directly, something that hadn't happened in over a year. When I answered, I could hear tears in her voice. "They're taking my car," she said without preamble. "Some guys came to the house with a truck and said you sent them to get the BMW. "That's correct," I said. "The car is registered in my name and insured through my policy. Since I'm no longer providing support to your family, I need the car back. But I need it for school, for work, for everything. You can't just take my car. It was never your car. It was my car that I allowed you to use. This is because of what happened at dinner, isn't it? Because of some stupid joke that got out of hand?" A joke. She was calling the deliberate humiliation that she'd recorded and posted online for thousands of people to mock a joke. What happened at dinner showed me exactly what my family thinks of me. The financial changes are just me responding appropriately to that information. "I'll take the video down," she said quickly. "I'll delete everything and apologize. Please don't do this. The videos should never have been posted in the first place, and even if you delete them now, hundreds of people have already seen them, shared them, laughed at them. You can't undo that." She was crying harder now. "I'm sorry, okay? I'm really sorry. It was mean and I shouldn't have done it. But you're ruining my life over one stupid mistake." "I'm not ruining anything," I said calmly. "I'm simply choosing not to pay for the life you've been living. If you want a car, you can work and save for one like most teenagers do." After she hung up, I sat in my office feeling something I hadn't expected. Satisfaction. Not pleasure at their distress, but satisfaction at finally standing up for myself. For years, I had absorbed their disrespect, their demands, their casual cruelty, all while opening my wallet to fund the very lifestyle that made them feel entitled to treat me poorly. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. It was time to make everything official. Saturday afternoon at exactly 2 o'clock, they arrived at my apartment. All 3 of them looked like they were attending a funeral, which in a way they were. They were about to witness the death of their financial safety net. I had spent the morning preparing my living room like a conference room. The binders of financial records were arranged on my coffee table, along with printed copies of the social media posts my niece had made. I had prepared a presentation folder for each of them, complete with highlights and totals that would make the scope of my support impossible to ignore or dismiss. They sat down reluctantly, my mother perched on the edge of the couch like she was ready to flee, my sister with her arms crossed defensively, and my niece slouched in the corner chair, refusing to make eye contact. "Thank you for coming," I said, standing in front of them with my own folder. "I've asked you here to discuss some changes in our family dynamic, specifically regarding the financial support I've been providing." "This is about the restaurant, isn't it?" My sister interrupted immediately. "Look, we're sorry if your feelings were hurt, but you're being completely ridiculous about this whole thing." "Let me finish," I said firmly. "Over the past 8 years, I have provided $192,000 in direct monthly transfers to support your household. I have paid $47,000 in credit card charges for everything from groceries to clothes to entertainment. I purchased a $28,000 vehicle for my niece. Including various emergencies and additional expenses, I have spent $284,000 supporting this family." I opened the first binder and began showing them the documentation. Bank statements, transfer records, credit card bills, years of evidence laid out in undeniable detail. This represents nearly half of my total income over 8 years. It's more than most people make in 5 years. It's a house, a retirement fund, every dream I've deferred while making your lives comfortable. My mother was staring at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "I had no idea it was so much," she said quietly. "It was supposed to be temporary help," I continued. "A few months to get back on your feet after the divorce. Instead, it became a lifestyle that you not only expected, but felt entitled to. And last Saturday, you showed me exactly what you think of the person who has been making that lifestyle possible." I pulled out the printed screenshots of the social media posts. My niece recorded my humiliation, posted it online for entertainment, and you, I looked directly at my sister, liked and commented on it, encouraging the mockery. My niece finally looked up, her face flushed with shame. "I said I was sorry about that. I took the videos down. After they had been viewed hundreds of times," I replied. after dozens of strangers had laughed at my expense, after my own sister publicly celebrated my humiliation. "We didn't think it was that serious," my sister said weakly. "You poured wine on a $600 dress at a restaurant where I was celebrating my birthday with friends and colleagues. You recorded it for social media mockery. Then you left me sitting there alone while you walked out without paying for the meal I had invited you to. How exactly is that not serious?" The room was completely quiet. For the first time in years, no one was making excuses or deflecting blame or trying to minimize what had happened. "So here's what's changing," I continued. "The monthly transfers have stopped. The credit card has been canceled. The car has been repossessed. I am no longer your financial safety net." "But what are we supposed to do?" my sister asked, panic creeping into her voice. "What every other adult does. Get a job, pay your own bills, live within your means. The same things I've been doing while also supporting all of you. You can't just abandon family," my mother said, finding her voice again. "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm simply choosing not to fund a lifestyle for people who have shown me nothing but disrespect and ingratitude. You'll figure it out, the same way millions of other people do every day." I handed each of them their folder of documentation. "Everything's in there if you want to review the numbers. But the decision is final. This arrangement is over." They left in stunned silence, taking their folders with them. As I watched them walk to their car, my sister's old Honda that I had also been helping to maintain, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the relationships that were probably ending, but relief that I would finally be free to live my own life with my own money and my own choices. For the first time in 8 years, I was accountable to no one but myself. The first month after our confrontation, I heard nothing from my family. No calls, no texts, no attempts at reconciliation. I told myself I was fine with this, that the silence proved I had made the right decision. But I'll admit, there were moments when I wondered if I had been too harsh, if I should reach out and offer some kind of compromise. Those doubts disappeared when I started hearing about their situation through mutual friends and neighbors. The news wasn't good, and frankly, it wasn't surprising. My sister had been forced to give up the 2-bedroom apartment I'd been paying for and move back in with my mother. At 41 years old, she was sleeping in her childhood bedroom while her 17-year-old daughter slept on the living room couch. The adjustment was apparently not going well for anyone involved. My mother, who was 73 and had been enjoying a comfortable retirement thanks in part to not having to fully support her adult daughter, was suddenly dealing with 2 additional people in her small house and the financial strain of feeding and housing them. She'd been forced to take out a reverse mortgage on her home to cover the debts my sister had accumulated, including the credit card balance I was no longer paying. But it was my niece's situation that provided the most dramatic change. Without the BMW I'd bought her, she had no transportation to her expensive dance studio across town. The classes I'd been funding, over $300 per month, were no longer an option anyway. She'd been forced to quit the dance team she'd been on since middle school and take a part-time job at a local burger joint just to help with basic household expenses. I heard about this from my colleague Jake, whose daughter went to the same high school. "Your niece is working at Fast Bite now," he mentioned casually during a work lunch. My daughter said she seemed pretty upset about having to quit dance. Tough break. I just nodded and changed the subject. But privately, I felt a complex mix of emotions. I wasn't happy that she was struggling, but I also wasn't willing to rescue her from the consequences of her own actions. She had made her choice when she humiliated me publicly and posted it online for entertainment. Now she was learning that actions have consequences. The second month brought the first attempt at reconciliation, but it wasn't what I expected. My sister didn't call me directly. Instead, she reached out to my college roommate, apparently hoping to use a mutual connection to get to me. "She called me last night," my friend told me over coffee. "She wanted me to convince you to be reasonable about the family situation. She kept saying you were punishing everyone for a misunderstanding and that family should forgive each other." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I was at that dinner. I saw what happened, and there was no misunderstanding about anything. Then I told her she should be ashamed of herself for letting her daughter treat you that way." By month 3, the desperation was setting in. My mother called me at work, bypassing my personal phone entirely. She was crying when my assistant put her through, something I'd rarely heard in my adult life. "Please, honey, we need to talk. This situation is getting out of hand. Your sister can't find a job that pays enough to support herself, and I can't keep carrying all of us on my social security. We're going to lose the house. Then maybe it's time for my sister to accept any job she can find instead of holding out for something that meets her standards," I said calmly. "She's trying, but she's been out of the workforce for so long. No one wants to hire someone with such a big gap in their resume. That was her choice, Mom. For 8 years, she chose to let me support her instead of maintaining her career. These are the consequences of that choice. But what about your niece? She's just a child. She shouldn't have to suffer for her mother's mistakes. This was the manipulation I'd been expecting, using my niece to try to guilt me back into funding their lifestyle. She's 17, not 7, and she's not suffering. She's learning responsibility. Maybe if she'd learned it sooner, she wouldn't have thought it was acceptable to humiliate me for social media entertainment. The call ended with my mother hanging up on me, but I felt stronger than I had during our conversation. The guilt that used to overwhelm me when she cried was barely a whisper now. I had clarity about what had happened and why I'd made my decision. Month 4 brought news that my sister had finally found work, a minimum wage job at a retail store. It was a far cry from the lifestyle I'd been funding, but it was honest work, and frankly, it was more than she'd been contributing for years. My niece had increased her hours at the burger place and was apparently saving money for a used car. I should have felt proud of them for finally taking responsibility for themselves. Instead, I felt nothing at all. The social fallout began around month 5, and it was swift and merciless. Living in a mid-sized city meant that everyone's business eventually became everyone else's business, and my family's dramatic change in circumstances hadn't gone unnoticed. The first incident happened at the country club where my sister used to get her hair done, a salon I'd been paying for through her credit card charges. When she showed up trying to book an appointment, she was informed that her previous payment method was no longer valid and she'd need to provide a new form of payment. When she couldn't, she had to leave without services she'd been receiving for years. The stylist, who knew several people in our social circle, apparently shared the story at other appointments. Within a week, multiple people knew that my sister's financial situation had changed dramatically and that she was no longer able to afford the lifestyle she'd been living. My niece's situation at school became particularly difficult. Her former dance teammates knew she'd been forced to quit due to financial constraints, but they didn't understand why. When the truth started spreading, that her wealthy aunt had cut them off, the story grew in the telling. Some versions painted me as heartless for abandoning family. Others, particularly after people learned about the restaurant incident, painted her as spoiled and ungrateful. The BMW incident became legendary at her high school. Students who had envied her car were suddenly sharing stories about seeing it being repossessed from her driveway. The same classmates who used to ask for rides to parties were now posting subtle social media comments about people who live beyond their means and fake rich kids. The most damaging story came from an unexpected source. The server from Elevation, the restaurant where my birthday dinner had taken place, happened to live in our neighborhood. The story of what had happened that night, the wine throwing, the family walking out, the obvious distress of both me and my friends, had made its way through the local service industry network. When people realized that the spoiled niece who threw wine on her aunt was the same girl who'd lost her car and had to take a job at Fast Bite, the narrative became crystal clear. My niece wasn't just dealing with financial consequences anymore. She was dealing with social consequences that followed her everywhere. I heard about this from my hairdresser, who heard it from her friend who worked at a restaurant downtown. Everyone's talking about how that girl got what was coming to her, she told me while touching up my highlights. Apparently, she was really awful to you at some fancy dinner, and now she's working fast food while you're doing great. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same social media presence my niece had used to humiliate me was now working against her. Old posts about her luxurious lifestyle, the expensive dance classes, the BMW, the designer clothes, were now being screenshot and shared with captions like, "This didn't age well," and "When reality hits different." My sister's job search had been complicated by the fact that several potential employers in our area had heard versions of the story. Small cities have long memories, and the image of a woman in her 40s who had been financially dependent on her younger sister for years wasn't inspiring confidence in hiring managers. But the most significant social consequence came from an unexpected source: my mother's church community. My mother had been attending the same church for over 20 years, and many of the congregation members had known our family for decades. When it became clear that she was struggling financially and had been forced to mortgage her home, several church ladies had stepped in to help. The problem was, they wanted to understand how someone who had seemed financially stable had suddenly found herself in such dire straits. When they learned that she'd been receiving significant help from me for years, and that I'd stopped providing it, they wanted to know why. My mother, apparently, had tried to paint me as the villain, the successful daughter who had heartlessly abandoned her struggling family. But several of these women knew me personally from church events over the years. They remembered me as responsible, generous, and respectful. They had trouble believing I would suddenly turn cruel without reason. When the full story eventually came out, including the restaurant incident and the social media posts, the church lady's sympathy shifted significantly. Instead of seeing my mother as a victim of her heartless daughter, they began to see her as someone who had enabled her adult daughter's dependency and failed to address her granddaughter's appalling behavior. The social isolation was perhaps more devastating than the financial consequences. My family had built their entire social identity around a lifestyle I was funding. When that lifestyle disappeared, so did many of the relationships that had come with it. The friends who had enjoyed expensive dinners and social events suddenly weren't available when my sister needed emotional support, or my niece needed rides to job interviews. Meanwhile, my own social life had never been better. Without the constant financial drain of supporting 3 additional people, I had money for the social activities I'd been skipping for years. I was traveling, attending theater performances, hosting dinner parties for friends who actually appreciated and reciprocated my generosity. The contrast was striking, and it wasn't lost on anyone who knew our family. 1 year after that terrible birthday dinner, I was shopping at a discount grocery store near my new house. Yes, I'd finally bought my own home with the money I was no longer spending on my family. When I saw them, my mother was pushing a cart with generic brands and store coupons clutched in her hand, looking older and more tired than I remembered. My sister was beside her, wearing what was obviously a work uniform from her retail job, her hair in a simple ponytail instead of the expensive style she used to favor. And there was my niece in a fastbite visor and polo shirt, clearly having come straight from work. They were in the produce section, carefully comparing prices on vegetables and choosing the less expensive options. It was a scene I'd never imagined seeing. My family, who had lived so comfortably on my dime for years, now budgeting groceries like most working families do. My niece saw me first. Our eyes met across the store, and I watched her face cycle through shame, anger, and something that might have been regret. She was thinner than she'd been a year ago, her face more mature, her posture less confident. The spoiled teenager who had thrown wine on my dress and posted it online for laughs was gone, replaced by a young woman who clearly understood consequences in a way she hadn't before. My sister noticed me next, and her reaction was more complex. She started to approach me, then stopped, apparently unsure of what she could possibly say. The woman who had once felt entitled to my credit card and had publicly celebrated my humiliation now looked like she understood exactly what she had lost. But it was my mother's reaction that surprised me most. She looked at me for a long moment, taking in my appearance, the confident posture, the quality clothes I could now afford for myself, the obvious prosperity that came from keeping my own money. And then she simply nodded. No drama, no guilt trip, just acknowledgement. I finished my shopping and was loading groceries into my car when my sister finally approached me in the parking lot. She walked over slowly, like she was approaching a wild animal that might bolt. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hello," I replied, continuing to load my bags. "You look good," she said. "Happy." "I am." She stood there for a moment, clearly wanting to say more, but unsure how to begin. Finally, she took a deep breath. "I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I need to tell you I'm sorry. Not because I want anything from you, but because you deserved better from us, and I know that now." I stopped loading groceries and looked at her directly. "What's different now?" "Everything," she said with a bitter laugh. "Working 40 hours a week for $8 an hour tends to give you perspective. Having to budget for groceries makes you understand what money really means. Watching your daughter learn responsibility the hard way teaches you what you should have taught her yourself. And I realized that for 8 years, you weren't just giving us money. You were giving us your dreams, your security, your future. And instead of being grateful, we treated you like our personal ATM. We took your generosity and threw it back in your face because we thought you'd always be there to clean up our messes." I closed my trunk and turned to face her fully. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't want you to say anything," she replied. "I just wanted you to know that we finally understand what we had and what we lost. Not just the money, but you. We lost the best person in our family because we were too selfish to appreciate her." I could see my niece and mother waiting by their car, watching our conversation from a distance. My niece looked like she wanted to disappear, while my mother simply looked resigned. "How are you doing?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. "Struggling," she admitted. "But honestly, it's the first time in my adult life that I'm actually responsible for my own problems and my own solutions. It's terrifying and exhausting, but it's also real. I'm finally living my own life instead of the life you were paying for." "And my niece?" She's grown up a lot this year. She'll graduate high school in a few months and she's already saved enough from her job to buy a used car. She wants to go to community college and pay her own way. She says she never wants to depend on someone else the way she depended on you. I nodded, processing this information. A year ago, I would have been tempted to help, to offer some assistance or encouragement. Now, I felt proud of them for figuring it out on their own, but I had no desire to resume my role as their financial safety net. I'm glad you're figuring it out, I said sincerely. All of you. We are, she said. It's hard, but we're finally living according to our actual means instead of pretending we deserved a lifestyle we never earned. I got in my car and drove home to the house I'd bought with money that used to go to their rent. As I unloaded groceries I'd purchased without calculating how it would affect anyone else's budget, I reflected on how much had changed. My sister was right about one thing. I was happy. Not because they were struggling, but because I was finally free. Free to live my own life, make my own choices, and keep the money I earned. The Italy trip had been everything I'd dreamed of. The house was perfect for me. My savings account was growing every month instead of being drained by other people's emergencies. As for my family, they had learned the lesson I'd been trying to teach them for years without realizing it. That financial security comes from your own efforts, not from someone else's generosity. My niece was learning work ethic and self-reliance. My sister was discovering independence and responsibility. My mother was understanding the real cost of enabling destructive behavior. They were finally living authentic lives instead of the artificial lifestyle my money had created for them. And I was living mine.